Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session, Enterprise Development Ecosystems and Opportunities for Micro, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. I'm delighted to be here as moderator with the panel that we have, who will introduce themselves to you shortly. My name is Dinah Bennett. I'm Director of International Consultants for Entrepreneurship and Enterprise, and also the Global Lead for Enterprise Development at the Women's Economic Imperative. So let me just frame this session. Women-led businesses have been particularly impacted, as we know, especially in sectors hardest hit by the pandemic. Research has shown countless times that compared to their male counterparts, women are more likely to have temporarily or permanently shut down their businesses due to the pandemic. They're also more likely to have experienced reductions in business operations and to have generated lower sales and revenue, and also consumer demand. Globally, the sectors most impacted are those where we are seeing more women concentrated, or what's known as the feminized sectors. Retail, trade, services, hospitality. Reasons for these gender differentials can largely be attributed to government-imposed restrictions and lockdown measures, sectors and industries of operation, as we just said, time spent on domestic responsibilities, access to social protections or lack of them, and access to financing, but also technological disruptions and digital skills capability. Recent studies highlight the support measures most needed by women-led businesses to recover and maintain business operations. These include government assistance in the forms of grants and stimulus funding, private sector capital and financing, but also trainings to improve digital and entrepreneurial skills. So with this in mind, we have a fantastic panel here today, made up of a range of individuals from Asia, India and Nepal, Sub-Saharan Africa and the UK, all who work in the business support sector, and who will be discussing the enabling environment for women-owned enterprises spanning the self-employed micro business in the informal sector to mainstream support by the banks. So what I'd like to do is just do a very quick introduction to the panelists before we go on to our keynote speaker, Mulenga Silwamba. Suki, would you like to start?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here for what promises to be a really interesting session. My name is Suki Iyer, and I've spent several years in international banking and with IBM with tech. Now I'm on the board of Sampark. It's a 30-year-old NGO based in India, which works on the economic empowerment and financial and social inclusion of women, amongst many other things.
Thank you, Suki. Jessie Lorenda? You're on mute, Jessie.
Right. My name is Jessie Nyirenda, and I'm the founder of Nursery Trees Consultancy. Before I set up the firm, I previously worked for a bank as a SME corporate relationship manager. I saw a gap between the financial institutions and the SMEs, so I took a leap of faith to try and see how I can bridge the gap through financial literacy and business development services.
Thanks, Jessie. And Jessie's based in Zambia. Nabina Shrestha.
Hello, everybody. This is Nabina Shrestha from Nepal. I have just joined Women's Economic Imperative, WEI, after working for 20 years at UNDP. So I have worked in the areas of inclusive growth, especially like, working with the women entrepreneurs and youth and different parts of the world, Africa, Europe, USA, and Asia. I went to Gaza and also Myanmar, worked with the Rohingyas and Mozambique with cyclone affected people, and also different parts of the world. So looking forward to having a very interesting discussion with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabina. Keith?
Hello, I'm Keith Herman. I'm Fellow of Student Futures at St Aidan's College, Durham University. I'm also a co-organizer of a series of webinars for the Societal Innovation and Enterprise Forum focused on the small entrepreneurial business and to celebrate the ideas and work of Professor Alan Gibb in a post-COVID world. And I'm also collaborating with Diana Bennett with regards to the design and development of training programs for banks and for banking institutions in the financial services sector to help them better understand and engage with SME clients.
Thank you, Keith. And now to Mulenga Silwamba, who's the Executive Head of Consumer and High Net Worth Clients, Stanbic Bank Zambia, who's going to deliver our keynote. Why don't you give us an introduction to herself too? Thank you.
Thank you, Dinah, and good afternoon. I'm hoping I've got that right. I probably should be saying good day to everyone, considering there's people calling in from all around the world. As mentioned, my name is Mulenga Silwamba. I am working for a bank in Zambia, which is called Stanbic Bank Zambia, which is part of the Standard Bank Group. And I've been in banking for over 20 years. I had a stint in the UK for about 14 years working for Lloyd's Banking Group. So pretty experienced in the whole banking world, but I'm extremely passionate about gender equality. And really, this is in connection with access to financial services, especially for women. And if you look at where we're coming from in terms of Zambia, according to the International Labour Organization, Zambia's informal economy accounts for 89% of the employed population. And this includes a staggering 96% of women. And this really just means that Zambians work in the formal arrangement, but have what we call a side hustle. Where they're making up in terms of how they fund their lifestyle. And many of these are informal workers and either employed in agriculture or retail. And this really represents hundreds and thousands of micro, small and medium entrepreneurs. And this segment, funny enough, is actually the most underbanked segment, and mainly because of the inability to access financial services. And it's easy to think that all they need is money, but actually, this is not always the case. And interestingly, in Zambia, we now have a new government as of the 12th of August. And actually the government has introduced a new ministry of small and medium enterprises. And I think what's really exciting about this is they recognize that they need to bridge this gap, which I think has been lacking if you look at where we're at with the SMEs and how they feel about access to finance. And if you look at what we have done as a bank, we have a special department that just deals with enterprise banking at Stanbic, because we recognize as well that there is a need that really comes through from an SME perspective. And what we have noticed as well is the lack of women acquisition in this whole proposition that we do have. So we've deliberately created 6 pillars, and this also just encourages women to just come on board, to just allow for them to feel that they're a part of this enterprise banking. And what we do is we speak about in the pillars. The first pillar looks at how will you help me transact? This is looking at the accounts, really offering them the access to just a simple banking through a debit card, through digital access on our online banking platforms. We also look at how do we save? How do we help these enterprises save? And we look at the accounts like call accounts, fixed deposit accounts. We look at government papers, just really talking to them about how they can actually save for the future. We also have Help Me Grow, which really looks at working capital finance, asset finance, trade finance, and we look at helping me my personal business, and this is me protecting my personal business. And this is where we look at the different types of insurance, from enterprise, motor, life insurance, foreign exchange hedging, and really just ensuring that the business is protected. We also look at how do we keep these customers informed. So how do they stay informed? This is where we have the financial literacy engagements, which include conversations on exchange rates, on monthly PMI reports, SMS alerts, just getting them involved in and up to speed in terms of what's going on, not just in the bank, but what's going on in the economy, webinars, and this also just creates a lot of networking opportunities. And I'll speak about the networking opportunities and how it is an issue for women. And then finally, what we do is we help them protect and create this dream that they have. Because I mean, most of these enterprises start off as a dream. And what COVID did is it actually showed us that overnight, your dream can be actually, your dream can be completely removed from the plans that you've had. So we focus on these areas, and simply because we want to ensure that we're covering the different needs and really ensuring that we understand what the pain points are. Women in particular, we've noted as well, find it very difficult to come into our branches. And this is very clear just by looking into a banking hall. And we get comments such as there's a language barrier, there may be that insecurity barrier. They feel safer, in the community arrangement. This is where they come up with, community banking services, which I'm sure Jesse will speak to. And there are all sorts of reasons as to why they feel unsafe. And what really is also critical is what you find is the men have a great way of networking. After work, they'll meet up in the bars, they'll meet up at the clubs, and they'll talk about what they're doing. And this almost gives them the courage to just walk through the doors and ask for things that, unfortunately, women don't feel they're able to come through. And this networking opportunity that I spoke about earlier really will help deal a lot of the issues that prohibit women to walk through the doors. But when we look at women as well, what we now have is a modular approach in terms of how we solution for women. And what we're now saying is, it's not one woman. It's not a solution for one woman. We look at different personas. And in this, we then understand what are the pain points. And we're really going not from a product driven approach, but more of a client driven approach, where we're making sure that we're client centric in every decision that we made and speaking to the actual personas, understanding what it is they need. And then what we've also realized as banks is we can't do this on our own. So partnerships are so key in how we do business. And we now have, partnerships with previous competitors. I mean, MNOs in Zambia are becoming the new banks, but we've partnered with MNOs, we've partnered with fintechs to just really allow for us to really spread our wings in terms of how we can reach out and empower the SMEs and really just address the needs that they do have. Giving you an example of another innovative solution that the bank has done through Stanbic is we've gotten a stock trader solution by partnering with the fintech. And this solution is absolutely amazing because what it does is it gives you the option of acquiring as a trader. And these are the traders that stand by the road that are every day trying to sell different little goods here and there. Airtime, which is basically your access to speaking on the phone. And what we have is the solution which caters for both virtual and physical stock. And from the virtual end, we've partnered with the MNOs and allowing these traders to free up their working capital to focus on other areas of the business. And also from the physical side, we've partnered with the likes of Nestle, where they're able to access physical stock without worrying about the payment being required immediately. And it's such a brilliant system because these are the ways we've realized that through the enterprise unit we have, that we need to understand the behavior of an SME to actually look at allowing it to grow. And I speak about access to finance not being the only solution, because what we also do is not only lend to them through this virtual and physical stock, we also give them advice. What we're able to see through the gadgets that they use to actually access the trader stock, we're able to see how much they're selling on a weekly basis. We then give them up to 70% as an allowance to borrow. But not only do we do that, we also look at what are other traders doing? How are they thriving? So we then go into a literacy where we're telling these customers, focus on these products, focus on these opening times, because this will then grow your business. So what we want to do is really partner with the SMEs, and in particular, women, who we believe are a safe segment. They have been proven to be the most creditworthy. If you look at our risk appetite, women are actually stronger than the men folk in terms of repayments. So what we want to do today is just really go through what it is where we can actually bridge this gap, which we seem to have across the globally. I mean, if you look at the representation of today, we've got people from Asia, we've got people from the UK. But what we want to do is look at how can we bridge this problem that we have spoken about so much, to just see how the banks can work with, be it the fintechs, be it the regulators, be it the government, and really just come up with ideas and seeing how we can move from today. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. I will hand over to Jessie, if I may, at this point.
Thank you so much, Mulenga. You've outlined what your bank does. In general, do you think that that financial institutions could actually be doing more to engage and support women?
Definitely, definitely, Dinah. We can be doing more as financial institutions. I mean, if you look at just COVID and how businesses were affected by COVID, we had quite a number of women businesses affected, and primarily because of the issues around, they have come into the bank to actually access our enterprise banking, but the fear of coming to tell us when they're struggling was also such an issue. So we had to almost take a more proactive response, where we were calling our customers. And there was a focus which we put on women, where we called women businesses to just see how they were doing. And I'll give an example of some of the things that we've done. We've given moratoriums on lending, where we've said, okay, the business is struggling because obviously they're not they're not applying themselves in the manner that they'd normally do as a result of COVID. And what we then said was, we will suspend their interest or principal payments, and really just sitting down with them, really understanding, do you need this for 3 months? Do you need this for 6 months? Do you need this for 9 months? So really, really getting into the detail. And I also think there are a lot of opportunities in what we see through COVID, because one of the reports we got back was, we do have this proposition in conjunction with China, which is really like an Africa-China agent proposition, where we have a connection for the Zambian trader to connect to a Chinese agent to actually access stock. And what we found is, during COVID, there was a lot of theft and fraud that was happening, and this solution came in as a bridge to help these vulnerable women who didn't have who couldn't travel, who didn't have access to stock. But we came through and really linked them to trusted agents and spent time with them, really training them around the digital platforms. Digital platforms also became quite handy because of the restrictions with the health and safety that the health and safety protocols that were implemented as a result of COVID. And what we deliberately did was educated our customers in terms of how they can access the bank without actually coming into the bank, and this really helped, because all of a sudden someone realized that they didn't have to walk through a branch, and for them this was the only way they thought they could actually bank. And what we've also done is, we've also looked at access to internet is also an issue because of cost and also accessibility. Not all areas will have internet accessibility. So what we've done is, we've listened to this and said they need some, feature phone where you can just dial *247# without access to internet. So there's a lot of, and trust me, there's a lot more we can do. We've started the journey. There's a lot more we can do, and I'm hoping that out of today we can also just get ideas of what other things we can do. Thanks, Dinah.
Thank you, Mulenga. And I like what you say. I mean, who would have thought we could talk about COVID opportunities, but obviously, people are finding some. So moving from the formal to the informal sectors, I'd like to ask Jessie and then Suki, based on what Mulenga has said in terms of post-COVID and COVID opportunities, as we call them, are there similar behaviours from microfinance institutions towards the more informal businesses? Jessie? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. So there was a study that Financial Sector Deepening Zambia did a couple of years ago. And one of the major insights from this study was that in view of the COVID situation, the banks were actually the last place that most women were rushing to. This is in the micro sector. And they found that sources of finance was actually based from family and friends and other informal networks. So it's based on this this study and this outcome that I look at it that banks cannot be the one-all solution for everybody. There is actually need for segmentation, which is rightfully so. And that's the step where we come in. We try and see how we can help the informal sector to formalize by offering them training, not only in financial literacy, but also in corporate governance issues. Because once these small enterprises have been trained or have had access to certain loans, and there's so many opportunities that are there to start supplying goods and services, which require them to formalize into companies and to enter into contracts. And therein lies the opportunities for us to give them a next step to not just knowing their numbers, but knowing how to interact with the formal sector. I mean, they may go to banks like where Mulenga is at, and they will ask them to say, bring your articles of association. And these are rural-based women, and they don't know what that is. But this is a document that maybe they just download from the internet once they have access, but they don't understand the legal implications of that. So we have seen that there are strides that have been taken with various players in the market, financial institutions. So it's at different levels. Yeah.
It's great. Thank you, Jessie. And Suki, so during your career, you've actually supported women across the spectrum, similar to Jessie, both from informal to the medium-sized business. What have you noticed in a positive way since COVID in terms of supporting these markets?
So I actually wanted to step back a little bit and sort of share a very quick glimpse of what happened post-COVID, I mean, during COVID in India with women entrepreneurs. And just like the experience has been that everybody's shared so far across the board, India too, what the data shows that during COVID, far more women-owned businesses were affected. So 43% of women-owned businesses saw a decline in profits as compared to 16% of men. And even if you look at digital inclusion per se, I mean, if you look at the kind of things that you usually are seen as examples of inclusion, whether it's bank account ownership or whether it's ownership of credit or debit cards or e-wallets, the experience in India has been that that gap has narrowed actually over the last few years. But it's not that it doesn't exist. And in some pockets, for example, if you look at ownership of debit cards, there is still like significant difference. I mean, it's like men own 20% more debit cards compared to women. And if you look at ways at which, if you're looking at the digital world and how people access that, and you look at the at cell phone ownership, again, there's a huge gap. I mean, there are far fewer women who own cell phones compared to men. And apart from ownership, even the usage, the data shows us there's a 50% less usage by women as compared to men. There are only 14% of women who own smartphones. When it comes to lending, women's applications for loans are rejected by 2.5 times higher than men. So there's a whole lot of statistics around this. We just go to show the degree of exclusion, whether it is largely at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, but also across the board. The thing that I want to emphasize over here is that a lot of this also stems from from data, from the lack of sort of gender disaggregated data. I mean, we all know that if you don't measure data, you don't value it, and you can't really do anything or create products or policies for that. And that's really that's a key issue and a key problem that financial institutions are grappling with today. So for example, Mulenga talked about how institutions can sort of come together to do something about it. In India, the post-COVID, the government did come up with various schemes to support women entrepreneurs, and NABARD, the organization, does do some macro level sort of collection and sharing of gender-wise data. For example, if you look at the urban or the rural divide, they do collect data. But the point is that while this data is collected, there is no data available to answer questions such as who's accessing what kind of products, what kind of channels make the most sense to women, what kinds of behavior is exhibited when they're accessing these products. There are no answers to these questions, and when there are no answers to these questions, how can how can financial institutions actually design policies or products for this. So so the point that I'm trying to make is that this sort of lack of gender disaggregated data makes it very difficult for financial institutions to track issues around asset ownership by women, or the lack of credit access, etc. And this means that therefore they're not able to really get hold of information about how women run their businesses differently, or even sort of create policies or products for that. And some research that we sort of did recently, we sort of found some reasons why that happens. And a big part of that is there is really no policy-wise incentive to make financial institutions look at this data from a gender perspective. So very often, many financial institutions, especially those that are sort of gender agnostic, don't really understand why it's important for them to look at things from a gender perspective. Very often their systems, their core banking systems don't support them in analyzing data along with gender. And like Mulenga said, while there is universal acceptance of the fact that women are better risk candidates, despite that, often the way they analyze data is more along product and not along gender, where ideally it should really be both. And in fact, what we found was that there are actually studies that have even within the sector of women entrepreneurs, there are segments even within that, the segmentation that exists within that has been well studied. But financial institutions don't appear to really use that data, and even if they do have access to the data, they don't really know what they can, how they can put it to good use. And one of the things we could consider is that given all of this is what's the role that fintech plays? I mean, can fintech support looking at helping financial institutions gather data and look at and use data better. And there's a great example I can share. Like there is this, for example, there is this lady who started a sort of a restaurant chain. She wanted to take her brand global. She went to traditional, financial institutions to ask them for money, and they denied her money because they were using the same old methods of, the way they looked at collateral, et cetera, when they were trying to assess the risk. So she went to this sort of new age fintech company. And what they did was they used non-traditional methods, so they sort of looked at her cash, they looked at her bank statements, they looked at sales data, they looked at not traditional methods like that to assess the risk. And then they were able to actually give her a loan. And now they've sort of, both that fintech bank and she have gone places. And the only reason they were able to do that was because they sort of held gender-wise data as a core to the products that they were designing. So it's a great example of how, if you actually do that, you can be more inclusive of women, understand the needs better, and actually on the ground should demonstrate that can be successful. There is a flip side to this as well, though. I mean, the thing is that fintech, when it uses things like AI, etc., there are built-in biases that could creep in, and then you could actually make the problem worse rather than better. There's a lot of research that's happening today around this, and also some of the research which suggests ways to mitigate that. So that's there as well. But so really, what I'm trying to say is that because there is no sort of this whole gender disaggregation doesn't happen, it sort of prevents organizations from making products which are designed for women, from creating outreach or communication channels that work for them. I mean, just for example, many women don't need banks to come to them because they multitask so much. They're always have 100 different responsibilities at home. So they can't really go out often to banks or far off branches, especially in the rural areas. So, for example, can banks use innovative ways to get to them? If they don't even know that this is what their customers need, why would they even design for this? That's really a huge issue. So there is a lot to be done. I mean, both from the regulatory perspective as well as from the management of banks, I think they really need to incentivize. The regulators need to incentivize banks to collect data. Banks themselves need to incentivize their own staff to understand the value looking at data like this and then creating products around that. So I think that's really key to getting where we want to, and to push the needle a little bit.
Thank you, Suki. And your point about gender disaggregated data, it's amazing how many policies and decisions are made by government and institutions without that. So how on earth do they have a full picture of what's happening? So thank you. Nabina, you're in Nepal and have worked like Suki across many different sectors. What have been your observations in terms of initiatives that work to support women post-COVID?
Thank you, Diana, for the question. Since we don't have much time, I will not go in a detail. But as you know, that women entrepreneurs, they face challenges even in a normal period. And after COVID, they are facing lots of problems, whether it's a policy related or social norms, especially in a country like Nepal and India, and access to finance, Mulenga has already talked about, and especially like unpaid work, taking care of children, they are studying, they are doing online courses and taking care of the elderly people, burden of work and access to technology and all those kind of things. But I really would like to, based on my 20 years of experiences, how we can do better in this, promoting this women entrepreneurs. I would like to discuss about two aspects. That's also very quickly. I just feel that, everybody, all the stakeholders, they are working on their own in isolation, fragmented way, whether it's a donors or, even UN agencies. There are so many UN agencies, but hardly they work together. UN Women, ILO, UNDP, of course, there are some examples work together, but all working in isolations. So, and on top of that, private sector, very important stakeholders, they could work together, and the banks, the government, civil society, if they work together, that the impact will be much bigger. And we have to initiate that. Otherwise, this promotion of women entrepreneurs the impact will not be as expected. We have to do that. And another thing is very important. Mulenga has talked about, access to the finance. That is, like many organizations, they don't look at the holistic approach, how we can help promote women entrepreneurs, especially like micro and small enterprises, how we can help them holistically. They do a bits and pieces. Some private sector, they only focus on market, they're supporting marketing, or some just technology, or some just microfinance, access to microfinance. But I feel that if we take an approach of integrated approach, these women, they need all kind of some support to be successful. And I would like to give one example that we started in Nepal. It's Microenterprise Development Program. This project started with a pilot project, but now it's become a national, the government-owned program, and implemented in all over the country. And we have already created more than 200,000 entrepreneurs. And that's also mostly women and socially excluded people, transform the poor people into the successful entrepreneurs. And we have done the impact study also. That's 80% of them who have started, they have been successful. And some of them have become not only economically empowered, but politically empowered also. They have become the representatives of, some politics, political group. So there, how we do is we start with social mobilization. So there are different 6 components. One is social mobilization, bringing women into the group, and also talking about not only building their confidence, but also, bringing their husbands, the mother-in-laws, the family, talk about gender issues, their role, the work burden and all, making them understand it's so important, especially husbands and, other family members. So social mobilizations, and then entrepreneurship development. We do this start and improve your business, the entrepreneurship training, because everybody cannot don't understand how to start their business, even though they have a skill. And those who don't have the skill, we also provide the skills training, another component, whether the basket weaving or whether the mobile repairing, there's the many skill trainings. And importantly, access to microfinance, linking with the banks. And most important is the appropriate technology, unless they have appropriate technology, that they cannot be competitive in the market. So another important component is the marketing support. So linking with the, markets and all those kind of, also this project really support them. And the important thing is this project not only supported in micro level, but also meso and macro level. Meso level, institutionalizations, like forming the cooperative associations so that they can do their business, well, and can be sustainable as well. And similarly, policy-related work, forming the different policies based on their grassroots level work. So we have already created 200,000, women entrepreneurs, and they are doing quite. So this way, integrated approach, if you just touch on just the micro, just entrepreneurship training, they may not have other skills. So this project really focuses on integrated approach. So what I'm trying to say is, to build back better, we really need to come together, all the stakeholders, multi-stakeholders, they come together and work. And another thing is, we have to really focus on holistic approach, not just the bits and pieces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nabina. It's nice to hear a program that's embedded and sustainable. So thank you. You mentioned policy measures. So moving from practice to policy, Keith, you've recently contributed and co-authored a policy brief as part of the T20 on behalf of WEI. What observations did you make relevant to the ecosystem for women entrepreneurs?
Hi, Dana. Yes, I'll make sort of three broad observations extracted from the elements of the policy brief that we wrote in partnership with colleagues in Zambia, the USA, Lebanon, Argentina, and the UK. And the title of that was The Economic Empowerment of Women Entrepreneurs in a Post-COVID World. And, there's been a lot of research already been done around the impact of COVID on small and medium-sized enterprises across the world, and even also a focus on women entrepreneurs or women-led businesses. And the sense that we get firstly is that there's a real need and urgency to accelerate the existing policy impetus with regards to access to finance for women-led businesses. We already have a range of institutions in the space. The paper that we wrote, as you mentioned, was written for the G20 Heads of Government Summit recently in Italy. And the G20 has a finance track. It has a whole set of institutions and infrastructure to support and enhance the issues of access to finance for small businesses. The GPFI has a financial inclusion action plan that it runs in partnership with the W20 group. So there's a lot already out there in terms of the infrastructure. But the real issue, in my view, is urgency with regards to really meeting the needs of small businesses, and in particular women-led businesses. We know, for example, and it's quite stark, this issue. If you look at provision of support, financial support to small business, women-led businesses versus, again, going to the point that Suki was making around data. We know there's clear evidence that women-led businesses are more profitable. Their repayment rates on loans are better. They save more, and their default rates are lower. And yet, even with that data, we still see financial institutions not responding to that on-the-ground reality of the viability of small women-led businesses. So there's a real need for action there by all those players that I've mentioned, but also more especially banking institutions around the world. And then related to that, we also need to recognize that financial products often do not always serve the needs of women-led businesses. This is even recognized by the IFC themselves. And the Bank of Montreal, for example, has indicated that without appropriate financial products for women-led SMEs, post-pandemic business growth will be challenging, and then they add, if not impossible. So that's the stark reality of the challenge that we have, and hence that first recommendation. The second focuses on the need to reform the financial sector with regards to ensuring that banks develop and adopt a customer-centric approach to designing and delivering financial services for women-led businesses. Again, the G20 has a range of platforms to enable and support this, but again, I'll make the point about urgency of action. And also when it comes to thinking about what we mean by customer-centric financial services, by this we mean digital solutions such as bioidentity, virtual in-branch advisors, online and mobile banking. These can make access to services much more convenient, particularly for women-led businesses. I'll give you two examples. In the Philippines, Smart Money and GCash use mobile money to provide access to financial services for women-led businesses as a stepping stone and or an alternative to formal bank accounts. Secondly, Copper, a Kenyan digital fintech company, offers digital payment access to merchants through M-Pesa. It then applies big data analytics to merchant payment transactions to offer SMEs unsecured short-term loans. So that's a really creative use of data, really understanding the need of small business entrepreneurs. And then the third recommendation is around, again, looking at the growth market in relation to women-led businesses. There are a lot of fast, high-growth women-led businesses that also need support and investment. And yeah, there's a real need to provide much better access to capital markets. And our paper, for example, made some very strong recommendations to G20 governments to accelerate policies to require financial regulators to grow capital market access to equity, angel, VC, and crowdfunding finances for women-led businesses. And to give you an illustration very briefly about what's happening in the space and what can be done, the Business Development Bank of Canada, for example, has launched a $200 million Women in Technology Venture Fund. So for those high growth women-led businesses, there are options and possibilities, but these need to be far more widespread and operating on a much level of greater scale. And these types of financial institutions need to be far more proactive in actively engaging and seeking out growth-focused women-led businesses. And then finally, I'll focus on, again, a policy recommendation that's around, again, going back to the point about urgency and acceleration with regards to implementing the G20's high-level policy guidelines by member states to ensure that policies require banks to develop tailored services for women SME clients. So there are a few thoughts. Thank you, Dinah.
Oh, thank you, Keith. Focusing on technology, an OECD report said that one of the biggest challenges with technological disruptions and digital skills capabilities, or lack of, for women, which really hit them harder. I know there have been some public-private sector efforts to accelerate technology adoption and digital skills training for women entrepreneurs. So can some of you just tell us what's happening in your countries and some of the positive results in terms of working against this to support women more with technology and skills capability? Suki, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, actually, I'd love to share something where there's a real wonderful combination of technology and, the personal touch. So, for example, we've got this whole thing called banking correspondence in India, where because India is so widespread, and that there are there are women entrepreneurs in small villages where it's not easy to access. It's not necessary that banks have branches there. What many organizations have done is they go with these handheld devices, which are digital, and they take sort of banking to the doorstep. So you have a combination of a person who's a banking correspondent, who could be a woman from the same village, who's been trained to do this. And with the handheld device, she goes across to the women entrepreneur and gets whatever information, your customer verification, things like that. So that's sort of grown, by leaps and bounds in the last few years, because it's acknowledged that it's expensive, not viable, necessary to set up branches everywhere. On the other hand, for example, many of the rural women prefer not to use OTPs as a way for verification. They prefer to use biometric because they just feel OTPs can get lost, biometrics don't go anywhere, and this sort of helps. So there are very interesting ways that technology is being used in combination with traditional ways to actually provide access to women entrepreneurs, especially rural and poor urban women.
Thank you, Suki.
Dinah.
Yes?
Yeah. I just want to pick up on a point. You talk about sort of digital literacy and access to digital technologies, but I think, and Mulenga may want to come in, and other panel members may want to come in on this as well, but there's a real issue around the policies and what the regulators are doing in terms of not so effectively enabling the proliferation of these disruptive technologies and fintech. It is often what happens is that the regulatory framework constrains a lot of the innovation and creativity that should be happening. So, to pick up the point on evidence of personal identity and evidence of proof of address and all these kinds of different requirements that are needed to open and manage an account effectively, the regulators very often over-regulate in this space, as opposed to really understand what is really needed to get an account up and running, to get access to finance quick, to open up and use technologies and leverage it more effectively. So for me, that's the starting point. Yes, we have all these technologies, but unless the regulators create an enabling environment, it's not going to happen.
That's a very good point. Mulenga, do you want to say something on that?
Yes, thank you, Dinah. And Keith, just to build up on what you have said, we have been involved in a lot of work around just being a little bit innovative to make access to financial services easier. And when I say easier, in terms of, you spoke about a physical branch. We're not going physical branch anymore. It's way too expensive and it's not convenient. What customers want is 24/7 access to financial services. And what we're looking at, I'll give an example of the bank. We're looking at a platform business. And a lot of banks and institutions are going down this avenue where they're looking at creating platform businesses where ecosystems integrate and literally someone can do their end-to-end business on one platform. And this requires a lot of collaboration with the regulator, the government, policymakers. It is such a combination. And if any of those are lacking, this is what is actually making it take longer to actually implement, because there's also that this is we first and foremost have to sensitize, because this is a new way. This is banks becoming more than banks, where if you want to buy if you're a farmer, you want to buy your stock, you can do that on a banking platform. This is not a traditional bank, and it's really a lot of hand holding, a lot of collaboration. And I think what's important and key is just around involving everyone that needs to be involved from the beginning. Because what we found is the later someone's brought in, the harder it is to then get them to understand and move in an agile manner, because agility is really, really key in the world that we're living, because things are constantly changing. And what we're doing is we're partnering with little merchants where they can actually access banking just through a merchant standing by the roadside. That will deal maybe up until midnight, as opposed to a bank that closes at 5. So I think for me, a lot of collaboration is required as well from the government regulator, the regulator, very, very key, and the policymaker. And I believe that once this collaboration starts, we'll get a lot of work around actually solutioning for these customers. I actually want to get to a stage where, Dinah, we're not talking about women or gender equality. It would be nice to get to a point where we don't even speak about the women. It becomes a norm where the platforms are accessible in the same manner, and there's that equality, and we no longer have to have sessions like this, and we're just talking about how do we grow them. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a vision we all have. Thank you, Mulenga. Suki, did you want to say something? And Jessie?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to say something to what Keith said, I mean, about this whole business of how policymakers actually, rather than using technology to make life easier, end up making life more difficult. And, one of the things we found in India was it's the same thing in many cases. I mean, there's so much documentation, there is something called an Aadhaar card. Many of them don't have it. And there is a particular bank which sort of cut this whole thing and said, listen, today's technology allows you to use geotagging. What more do you need? I mean, women are, if they're geotagged, they're right there. They can't go anywhere. So you just do a simple KYC based, know your customer based on that, and just one more document, and that's all you need. So, so they are finding, to Keith's point, yes, banks and regulators do make life very difficult and therefore make finance more inaccessible. And it just requires the intent of a financial institution to understand the intent behind that, the requirement for security or checking, and find a creative way to cut through it and make life simple for both the woman entrepreneur and yet meets the need of the regulator. So that's very possible. It's just that there has to be an intent to do that.
Yes, absolutely. There has to be an intent, and with that comes an understanding of those that they are regulating for. And I think often the case with policymakers and regulators, they really don't understand the entrepreneurial life world, the SME, let alone that of a woman running a micro small business. Yes. Thank you, Suki.
Yeah. Dinah, I just would like to share something on this, you must have noticed, yes, immediately after the COVID, most of them, they switched their marketing through the online, like e-commerce and all. And most of the women, they lack the basic skills of even, this digital marketing, IT skills and all. So they, again, after the COVID, they've affected a lot. That's why, our projects and in different countries providing a digital skills to women. And one of the example I would like to give is most of the women entrepreneurs, they don't have a basic skills. So what we have done is, helping cooperatives or associations to have a e-commerce or setting of online marketing, so that members can sell their products through that, association or the cluster or the, a group of businesses. That is what we did, because it was not possible for us to each individual to teach the, provide the training. So it was a group of cluster or the association we provided. One of the example is a strawberry. They were selling in the different parts of the countries in the 5-star hotels, but because of the lockdown, they could not do it. So, started with the online businesses, and they did quite well. So this is one of the example I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Dinah, sorry, yeah. Dinah. I think as we're talking,
I wanted to add on the
sorry, go on, Jessie.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
so
no,
I wanted to give a different perspective in terms of financial cooperatives that are not regulated by the central bank. So therein lies the problem that we were able to digitize the whole process, give them access to savings and being able to disperse loans using their mobile network operations. However, we found that the challenge was in the fact that they were not really able to assess the portfolio loans at risk because they didn't understand the risk component of that factor. So we saw that there is an opportunity also, in as much as we may be able to digitize the financial cooperatives and they're able to attract more people to join the institution, there is need also for them to be trained to understand how they can be reviewing their portfolios at risk, because they're not regulated by anybody. So this is depositors' funds which they're on lending and is being put at risk. So it's just a different perspective of looking at it in terms of, as much as the regulators may be a clog in the wheel, at some point that we do need that interface in order to protect the depositors' funds.
Oh,
so there is an opportunity, so there is an opportunity for us also to see how these financial cooperatives can be trained in terms of when they are setting their bylaws to look at other means. And this also doesn't just look at the aspect of access to loans. There is also opportunity in terms of financial deepening. There's so many other services, financial services that they need to access. It could be in terms of insuring their livestock and maybe accessing guarantees and things of that nature. So we do have a long way to go in terms of bringing in women into this loop. Mulenga, you may proceed. Sorry for cutting you.
No worries. I just wanted to just bring in a different twist to the conversation. I think we also need to look and introspect as institutions. Do we have the capabilities to understand women? And this is where the training comes in the institutions, because in that you'll find that there'll be a conversation happening, but if the person who's supposed to be helping the woman doesn't understand, it's pointless. So I thought I'd just bring that in. Thanks.
No, absolutely. Gender blind, policies. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, I'm very conscious of time and we could go on forever. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Unfortunately, we can't because we have the rest of the conference. I would like to ask you one final quick question. So if you could be very brief with this. And as ever, the Women's Economic Imperative is very much focused on action, realistic action that one could undertake. So, from both a policy and a practice level, what strategies in your mind, just one, could governments and other actors employ to ensure the correct enabling environment, an appropriate enabling environment is in place for women, small, medium enterprises, micro, post-COVID? Who would like to start? Suki.
Well, I think mine's going to be a kind of obvious thing. Like I think it's really important for regulators like, say, the Reserve Bank of India or the Ministry of Finance to actually not just encourage, but make it mandatory for financial institutions to just use systems that will help them disaggregate data by gender. I think that's a one-point thing I would suggest.
Brilliant. Thank you. Keith.
My recommendation or suggestion is actually a very practical one. I think we need a massive scaling up in building the financial literacy of women-led businesses, because that will then enable them to be more effective in engaging the financial services that are available to them.
Okay, thank you. Financial literacy scale up. Thank you. Jessie. Jessie, I think she's frozen. No, you're there. Jessie, one thing.
Yeah.
We're running out of time.
My quick win is building up a pipeline of viable women-owned enterprises that have been gone through financial literacy, and they can be handed over to bigger commercial banks, like, for instance, Stanbic. So it's mostly building up a pipeline.
Great. Okay. And passing them through that journey. Thank you. Nabina, very quickly, please.
Yeah, quickly, which can be done in practice also, linking with this women entrepreneurs, micro and small enterprises to big business houses, like this. If we can make linkages and if they can buy the products from the micro entrepreneurs or small entrepreneurs, that will be very good. And also the private sector for doing that, like you can reduce the tax from the government. This is the linkage can be done. If they don't want to deal with the individual entrepreneurs, then associations and cooperatives can come in and, ensure like a timely delivery and quality.
I'll have to stop you, Nabina. We're running out.
Thank you. Yes.
Mulenga, very briefly. I think I know what you might say. Based on what you just
Deliberate
said.
policy to build up with examples of set numbers of how we've built women, and we have to demonstrate it as financial institutions. So as Jessie passes them on, we have to demonstrate how we've grown them as banks.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so sorry I had to cut you all short. We could have gone on for another hour. It's wonderful. I've really enjoyed this. There's clearly still a lot of work to be done, but some really interesting things happening around the world. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So thank you so much all. It's been my pleasure to be your moderator.
Thank you.
Many, many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Sure.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Diana. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks ever